I'm Joe Hogan, and today I'm going to demonstrate the making of a Connemara lobster pot. My template here has 9 holes. 8 would be the minimum number, but the number depended a little bit on whoever was making. This is based on a pot I got from a man called Festy Mortimer, who lived in Ross Row, south of Leenane, and he used to use 9. For a while I used to use 8, but now I've kind of gone back to having 9. And the diameter is roughly 5 inches. So that's my 9 rods introduced, and I'm just going to put a simple tie on the top. And if one wanted, you could take something like a plant pot and just put what we call a scrawl into it and insert the uprights that way instead of using a wooden template. That's leaning a bit to the left, but I'll be able to correct that later. So I have a weaving rod here, and I just turn it to begin the weave. So this is how it would traditionally have been done, and you just begin to pair, but I'm going to give it one extra turn. And that means it'll be much less likely to slip off. So this weave is called pairing. Fiocon cá slach ascuiga. And we already can now begin to supplement. So where there's a rod coming out, we will supplement with the second rod, like so. So this we call lobster pot weave. Agus ascuiga yurha fiochan put the glimoch. That's long enough to go one more time. So I'm making a join here because this rod is exhausted. So you draw this lower one first, and then this one follows, leaving what's left behind in a trapped position. That's not quite long enough to go again, so I have to make another join. So the neck of the pot will consist of about 5 or 6 rows of weaving like this. Sure to hook the show ascuiga no an barach agus beidir gomach she row fiochan agus in sin by much creek near a piece. So I'm just going to firm down what I've done by getting my wrapping iron. And now we'll continue in the same way. So I'm just going to release the tie now because the neck has stabilized the weave. And that will allow me to draw them in whatever direction. Keep it as straight as possible. So when there's about 6 or 7 rows on the neck of the pot, that's sufficient, and you can tuck in your rods. I'm just going to, you can thread it under the previous row like that, or indeed, if you prefer, you can thread it through there. Nuair atá sé or seacht rónaí slathi jonti agat ar a marach that dún an na slathi journach a chur faoi mar seo agus dan fiochan sin críochnia dieta da dogracha slata chur slata ríis agus casústeach faoi gó. Tá sé sin an sáhailtí tá botún gentín sin ná. So I'm just going to give it another tapping down now. And I'm going to supplement all of these uprights. So we have 9 uprights in the pot there. So you can slide these either on the back or on the belly. It doesn't matter. If you want the cut to be hidden, you would put it on the back. I don't think they were too perturbed either way. But the big thing is that the rod would flow out this way. So I'm going to insert the uprights like so. And if you have difficulty getting it in, with your bodkin and grease up. Because you do need quite a good grip for these. So again, a long slipe, in my case on the back of the rod, and insert it like so. Okay, so we've moved outside because for this section we'll be taking up a lot of space. So I'm going to draw the uprights. I kinked them first, and I'm going to draw this pair towards me in this direction. Just use something to keep it down. Now I'm going to go immediately to the opposite direction. So I'm beginning the weave here now of the next section of the pot. So this is normal pairing. So tá má gona tosúis an baitheis agus seo an gná fiocáin gásláth. And I'll continue weaving in the same way. So now I can begin to supplement the rods, which means I will be going into lobster pot weave as opposed to pairing. Two things to watch for when you're weaving the section of the pot is to make sure that your thumb cannot fit into any of the spaces, because you want to keep the weaving tight. There's a structural reason for this, but also you don't want the lobster to be able to get the bait from the outside of the pot. As an ishtama go lagahru fiochan, guji fiochan potiglimach. Now I'm changing the weave to lobster pot weave. So I'm putting in the second rod there. So I've sliped another group of rods here, all of them sliped on the belly, and I'm going to put at least 9 rods in. So I've opened out the original pairs like this, so each area like this will get a supplementary upright, so that's one being put in there, and it needs to catch in at least 2 rows of weaving, like so. So the next one, this pair has been opened out hard, so I'll put that upright in there. So again, sliped on the belly, and I insert my rod like so. And you have to make sure, if possible, to catch in a minimum of 2, but I prefer to catch in 3 if at all possible. So here's our next pair here. So I usually do this symmetrically. So I've been in the, looking at it from this direction, the left hand one of that pair, so this will be the left of this pair. And then if you feel you have any wider spaces, you could always put in an extra upright or 2. The general number is about 28 uprights. So if this doesn't insert easily, you could just take a tiny slice on the slipe like that, and it'll slide in that little bit easier. So I can take away these things now because the rods are sufficiently weighted down by the weaving. And I'll continue with the weaving, and I'll gradually incorporate the new uprights as I meet them. So I have incorporated all of the new uprights that I inserted there a little while ago. So now there are 27 rods. It could be 28 if you had spotted any extra wide space, but I felt 27 was adequate. Just two things to notice. The Baithis, as it's called in Irish, this section of the pot, it's not absolutely flat. It's sloping outwards a little bit, and that will mean when I take it out from the template that it will have a better shape. So now I'm going to trim off these little end pieces, just roughly. And there are my two pieces of weaving, and notice that I have incorporated each of the new rods at least twice. So it's all quite secure. So now I should be able to prise it out from the template like this. And I have a mat to protect the bark. And I lay it up like so. I give it a little trimming here. Traditionally, people would have given these a slightly angular cut. So the size of the Baithis at this stage is about 12 inches, give or take. If it were greater than that, you would probably kink your uprights. If you're looking for a slightly more rounded shape, then you don't have to kink them. But the first thing I'd usually do is I'd get myself a little cushion so that I can kneel on the structure. So I kneel on the opposite side to where I'm working. And I take this and just give it a little bend and then give it a slight kink like that. I'll repeat that process. That's done. So I'm just going to put a weight on that to help it stay stable while I gather up the uprights. And I'll have a hoop here nearby me. So I'm going to gather up the uprights, maybe two from one side, two from another side. So if you take two from north, take two from south, and again two from another section, and two from opposite it. So there was a time I would have just caught these with the tie and gathered them up, but now I usually use a hoop because my hands aren't as strong as they used to be. And I put on a second hoop. It's just a way of stabilizing it until such time as I tie it. But I have very little doubt in my head but that they wouldn't have traditionally used hoops that they've just tied up. So if any uprights are sticking out too much, it's quite easy to adjust them with this method. So now I'm just going to put 2 ties on to keep it stable. And I try to keep this straight because it allows you to be able to adjust the uprights if you need to. So now we can take off the hoops and take this out and carry the pot indoors to finish it. So now we've moved indoors, so I'm just going to build up the side of the pot by weaving in the same manner and allow it to open out gradually. So it's time to make a join. So you can see that one is going over to the right, so you can use the weave to bring it back closer to the other upright. And once you've completed one round, it's often a good idea to take stock and maybe retie if need be, because it's probably listing a little bit to one side. Not too bad actually. And if need be, you could put on your hoop and go through the whole process of retying. And gradually one can allow these spaces to get a little wider. So from now on, I'd want it to be about the width of a thumb and gradually maybe 2 fingers. And you normally wouldn't weave the last 12 inches or 30 centimeters of the rod. I put in a new butt each time. The other rod follows, and the spent rod is left behind in a trapped position. So I think I'm going to pull it in just a little bit now. I think it's about 18, 19 inches diameter, so it's probably enough. So I'll put on a slightly smaller hoop to help me and maybe do a retie. And if you needed to bring it in a little more, you could even put on a third tie. So I tend to make the pot on its side, but from now on, once you've sloped it in, you could of course put it on a table or a lap board and rotate it like a normal basket in that fashion. You'd probably release the tie again once you've kind of curved and go about halfway up. So I'm probably going to about here, so maybe another half hour or so, and then we'll be knocking the top a bit like a creel. Okay, so my pot is getting to the point where it's almost tall enough. I have narrowed in to a point of about 14, 15 inches, I'd say. Yeah, that's 15 inches. If you want that in centimeters, it is about 38 centimeters. And I'm just going to put my lobster pot up like that for a moment and see where I need to level off to. So I kind of go back from it a little piece and see if it has a high point. It's close enough to being about there. So I'll put a chalk mark at that point. Here's a piece. And I will try to allow this row to merge gradually so that it's flat at this point. And then I'll have one more row on top of that so that there'll two rows on top of each other to finish. So I'll aim to be coming in a decreasing height now until I merge to be level there. So I'm gradually getting lower until I merge there. So I'm back to my chalk marks here, So I can allow it to flatten out. And then I'll have one complete row on top here. And that's necessary so that you'll have a place to anchor the base. That rod is quite weak. I possibly should have joined a little earlier, but it's okay when there's another row below it. I should also mention, in terms of the thickness of the willow that I have been weaving, the thinnest material, probably about 6 to 7 millimeter thick as rods, would be here at the neck and this early part. Then as spaces get a little bit wider, you can afford to use slightly thicker rods. But most of the time the rods will be no more than about 8 mil thick or so. And the material doesn't have to be terribly sorted. And if there are branchy rods, you can also usually incorporate them. So I've returned more or less to the area where I began. So there's 2 rows on top of each other continuously now. So I should be able to finish. And in finishing, you can either come through all of the previous row or half of it. It's probably simpler to come through all of it. So I will thread in front, behind, and out under that. And that's 2 rods coming out there, so you could take one of them again and thread it one further time. And likewise. And now I'll eye it up and see if it's reasonably level, and I can turn off all my ties. This is also your opportunity to trim the inside of the lobster pot, because you won't get a better opportunity. Okay, so I have 27 uprights in this pot, so I want to separate out 16 for the finish. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 8 would be one side for finishing. So we could put just a little temporary tie on that. So if we do a little sum, 16 from 27 means 11. So I can count either 5 or 6. It's an uneven number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this 6 I will catch in a group here so that I don't confuse myself later. Now I'll count a further 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then that means I should have 5 on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you had an even number, for instance, if you had 28 uprights, you'd have 6 and 6 to weave with. It might seem unnecessary to tie in this way, but having confused myself on a few occasions, I prefer to do that. So now, these 8 and this 8 will form the warp for the base. So, beginning here, and this material is good, so I can actually get away with just bending it down like so. But if I had any doubts about my material, then I would use my kinking knife and give it a kink first. So here are the excluded ones. So this is my warp rods here. So this is going to come out under this. Similarly, bend that. And I will point the tip just to make it a little bit easier to pull through. And it will come out between these two uprights there. So this is essentially based on the same logic as a creel, the finishing. You're forming a warp over which the other rods can weave. Okay, so that's your first warp. So this now must be an empty space. So this is where the next ones will come out. So given that I began with the left-hand rod, I continue in that process. So again, this will come out between those two. So a group of rods, a space, a group of rods, a space. So this is the next area available. a side branch there, so I'll take it off. So again, this space is empty, so it's through here I come with. So that's the warp formed, and now I'm going to weave to make this line straight before these can be engaged with, and similarly to make this line straight. I usually prefer to put my first weaving rod into the fabric of the pot and weave in that way. So I'm going to kneel. And put my rod. So it depends how straight this is. If it were curved, you might go in there and immediately turn. I think that's what I'll do anyway. But if it was very curved, you can allow the weaving to be dictated somewhat by the shape of the pot itself. So that weaver has got a grip now. And over under. And then fold back on itself. And it's well worth your while finding a nice pliable rod for this if you can lay hold of it. And here your choice is whether you would circle around all of that or circle around a part of it. In my case, I think it would make more sense to just circle around that piece. So I'll feed it through there. So there's a slightly improvisational quality to this, in the sense that it depends on what the circumstances on the ground are. So when we finish, we can either thread through or let it rest on top. So if I was coming with a weaver here, that would be over, under, so it wouldn't be too good in terms of the weave. So it would be better if I were leaving that there, my next rod to begin here, because then I could go over, under and keep the weave correct. So I'll explain that. And from now on, you could, if you wished, just lay your rod underneath. But usually with the opening weaving rod, I usually insert it into the work. So again, in through there. This one has gone over, under, so I'm putting my next one in here. And again, if you have difficulty, get your bodkin and open up the space. Bend your weaver and go over, under. And again to here. Now, on this side, I have begun to meet a true upright, one that's coming all the way up. So I don't need to return with this. But in this situation, I probably wouldn't have returned with this anyway, because to return there would create a little bit of a hole. So my likelihood instead would have been to put in another weaver there and to weave on. But since I'm meeting a true upright, that'll be the next rod to be woven. But I won't do that until I see to the other side first. So I'll just trim there. On this occasion, there isn't a very convenient place to insert my upright, so I might begin now as if it was a creel filler and begin from this side, under, over. Under, over. And then bring it out under the top of the top knot, like so. There's quite a bit of strength left in this rod, so I could actually decide to return with it and go under, over, and out that way. I think I probably will actually do that. Through here. And if you ever found yourself with a crevice, a descending curve here, you could actually turn back just these two rods again just to fill that line. I consider doing it there, but I don't think it's quite pronounced enough to need it. So now we have come to the point where we have our true uprights, so I can release that tie. And I'm beginning on this side because this will give me the correct weave. If I began here, that's already over. So I'm beginning on this side, over, under, over, under. These rods will just rest on top of the weaving. And once I've woven this one, then I'll go to the other side and straighten up there. So this is the next rod here. Over under. I want to give that some more force to straighten the line. Yeah. And now some fillers. So from now on, the fillers can just do an under. They can begin underneath like a creel filler. They don't need to be driven into the work. So it's under, over. I'll bring that some of the way first. Under. And then out either under the first row of the top knot or half of the top knot, whichever is more convenient. I'll come under all of it here, I think, because the space is tight. And I'm actually going to use that same rod and reverse back, because it'll strengthen things. I'm going under the top half of the top knot there. Okay, we've met this upright, so it's ready to be engaged with. So over, under. Now, as it happens, we have another upright straight across from us, but that won't always happen. So if it doesn't happen, say if there was a big space, you just get a filler or two fillers until such time as you're ready to engage with the next upright. just give a bit of tension to that last. And if a rod were to break, see there's a tiny weakness there but has come through fine, you just cut and replace and put in a new rod. Not a big deal. So all that remains now is to put in a few fillers in those empty spaces. So this is the last of my filling rods, so I'm going through here with it. And if you own a tool like a fid, you can use it, of course, for fishing out your rod. That's good enough, I think. And out under the top of the top knot. I might have to open that space because it's getting tight now. So I think that's filled enough, and all that remains then is to trim these where they rest. Shrinkage wasn't such an issue for lobster pot makers in the sense that the baskets were in the water a lot, and of course that I made them from half fresh material as opposed to dried material as I've made this one. So that pot I've just completed is made from whole rods and is based on one that I got from Festi Mortimer. But this pot here, made by Packie O'Toole in Inishturk Island off the Mayo coast, is made from wild willow, Black Sally as it's known locally, and he had a very small choice of rods to work with. So this particular rod, if you notice, is quite a thick rod with several side branches which he has split in two. So he would have taken a rod like this, for instance, got his knife, and he would have used thumb pressure to separate them and to make two rods of one in that way. And you control the thickness. If it goes too much to one side, say if you make a mistake, then you can bring it back by drawing in the other direction again. And otherwise you try to keep the two thumbs evenly. So it's onwards like that. So there are 11 uprights in this, and he still ends up with the same number of stakes total. I think it's 27 or 28. And some are added quite late, but most are put in the barrock or the neck of the pot. So by the time you're out here, you already have 22 or 23 uprights. And the weaving material is also Black Sally, the thinnest and the most flexible that he could find. And they liked this material because it lasted longer in the water than the common osier or Salix feminalis that they use for creels. So this is a heather pot, put the glumach gently as frioch, and I made this 20-something years ago, and they were more long-lived than the ones made from willow. So there were a particular place in West Mayo that they used to have these a lot. It was north of Achill, and they used to come to the cliffs of Achill to harvest the heather. The first one of those I ever made, I went looking for old, strong heather, and I ended up with material something like this. Thick, chunky, and very, very difficult to make something from. I realised afterwards that one of the advantages of going to places like cliffs is that the heather will be growing on a bank, reaching out for light, and therefore you're much more likely to get long, slender pieces. So this piece of heather is probably as old as this, but it has reached for the light and therefore is a lot longer and thinner. So if you can source heather of this sort, it will be much better for your heather lobster pot. And again, rather than using a wooden template, you would use a pot with a piece of turf, or scraw as we call it, and you'd piece it into it like that. The finishing is essentially the same. There's a warp and a weft, and that you close it in the same basic way. And if your pieces of heather are not long enough, you can always supplement. You know, your stakes mightn't be long enough, so you can always put in a new piece to try to have it long enough to complete the pot.